my goal for this video, stay in the middle, okay? Stay in the middle of the frame. I'm not sure what it is that's pulling me that way every time, but anyway, that's a me thing. You don't have to worry about that. So, I like experimenting. I'm a curious being, and I'm confident that the last time you had blueberry pancakes, you went, gee, I wonder if we could turn this into wine. Well, we're on the same page. So that's what I want to see. I want to see if we can make a wine that tastes like blueberry pancakes in a bottle. So there are kind of two ways to do that. The first would be to make a liqueur, which would be to get vodka and infuse flavors into it. It's kind of like how limoncello is made. The second way would be to make a wine out of it. And we're going to do the second way because this isn't called Let's Liqueur About It, okay? And yeah, I mean, besides that, it's just more fun to make a whole wine and the fermentation and sciencey prospect of it. And it's all long term and it's harder to do. It's harder to get the flavors right. So the achievement is better. Anyway, we're making the wine. This may not work out. It may not, because I've never made blueberry pancake wine before. And as far as I know, no one has. So this is what I think makes the most sense of getting there to get to the end goal. But if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because it's about the journey, not the destination, and what we learn along the way and the friends we make. Why are you looking at me? For the recipe, get 1.2 gallons of spring water, 4 pounds of blueberry fruit spread, all right? This is any kind of jelly or jam or fruit preserves, and anything within that family that is blueberry based. You can use as long as it doesn't have any preservative chemicals like sorbates or sulfites that will inhibit the activity of the yeast later on. So get one without that stuff in it. I use this stuff that I found at Sprouts, and it should work out fine. No, wait, it's not at Sprouts. You can see it labeled on there. It's Whole Foods. Was it same thing? Now, why not fresh blueberries? Well, you could. I am finding that jellies and jams, when used in a fermentation, tend to pack a whole lot more of a fruity punch in the end product than if I just used fresh fruit. Don't know why that is, but they preserve that fruitiness that I like in my wines a whole lot more than the corresponding amount of just fresh stuff. So we're using it again, and we're going to continue to test that hypothesis. It's also cheaper. It is also cheaper. So 2.5 pounds of very dark maple syrup. As you know, if you watched my maple wine video, and I'm sure you did because you watch all of them, maple syrup comes in 4 grades or types. Let me see if I remember, because I didn't write it down. It got light, amber, dark, and very dark, or close synonymous terms to those. And you want to go with that 4th really rich, really dark, robust taste variety, because that is how you'll get the most mapley flavors in the final product. Yeast are very severe animals, and they tend to destroy flavors that aren't really packed in there. So I know that's all a metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. So get the very dark stuff. 1/8 of a teaspoon of wine tannin. I like using wine tannin powder. A lot of people will use a cup of black tea to get their tannin. You can do that if you want to. That's not what I'm doing. It's a whole lot more precise if you measure out 1/8 of a teaspoon. You really don't know how much tannin you're going to get from black tea, depending on the strength of the tea, how long you let it steep, all of those things. And plus, it will sometimes taste like black tea in the end. For that rounding out of the flavor that we're going for from tannin, it's best to use the powder. But to each their own. I'm not going to judge, except a little bit. 1/2 teaspoon of pectic enzyme. Now, what is pectic enzyme? Well, it's an enzyme that breaks down pectin. You see, jellies and jams have pectin added to them to make them coagulate into a spreadable consistency, okay, into that jelly. Pectin, though, in fermentations, if not treated, can create a haze later on, either in secondary or in the bottle. And it's not stuff that's gonna fall away with time. It just stays there, cloudiness in its appearance. And we don't want that, we don't want to risk that. So you get pectin enzyme because it breaks pectin down. That's the whole explanation. 3.8 grams of GoFirm and 4.4 grams of FERMAID-O. Both of these are yeast nutrients. The GoFirm is for today. Okay, we're gonna add that to the yeast and some water, and that's nutrient right at the beginning to help out the fermentation. But then you're gonna split that 4.4 4 grams of FERMAID-O into 3 doses. That's going to be 1.5 grams that you're going to add tomorrow, the day after that, and the day after that. Okay, day 2, 3, and 4. That is to give your yeast nutrients as they ferment. Okay, so you get the concept here? Two nutrients for 2 different things. It all makes sense. Lastly, 3 grams of Lalvin QA23 yeast. We're using QA23 because I use it on everything and because it works really well with maple syrup to preserve the flavors and the consistency, that smoothness, the richness of the product. Anyway, QA23 is good for that. So that's what we're going to use. So how do you put this together? Well, step 1, as always, is to sanitize. I don't want to say it all over again. You gotta sanitize your stuff. That's what I did. That's what you should do. It's a good practice. Then you want to create your yeast and nutrient slurry. That will involve getting a little jar, putting about an inch of water in it, and then weigh out the amount of GoFirm and yeast that we will be using today. In this case, you're going to weigh out 3.8 grams of GoFirm on your gram scale. Okay, so zero it out. And I know you have a gram scale because there's a link in the description where you could buy one, right? Yeah. And then add 3 grams of yeast and then put a lid on. Okay, if you don't have a lid and you shake it, it's going to pour out. So put a lid on and then shake it. Okay, get all mixed together, all homogeneous, and then set it aside for at least 20 minutes. That is to allow the yeast to bloom, to wake up, to rehydrate, pick your term, and then you put it into your mixture, but that's later. So just put it off to the side. Then add your water to your bucket. We are using a brewing bucket today, okay? We're not using a carboy, we're using a bucket. So get a bucket and put your water into it. It's pretty easy. Like I said, we're using 1.2 gallons, so it just goes a little bit past halfway in that 2-gallon bucket. The reason I'm going for 1.2 is I like to make a little over a gallon so that as we rack going forward into new containers, we can still leave some behind, but then still have a full gallon of final product. See the logic? Then get yourself a spoon and scoop out that jam, that fruit stuff, okay? Get it into the water. There's no magic here to what we're doing. You gotta do it. And scoop it all in there. If you look into your bucket, it's gonna look like someone pooped into a bucket of water. That's exactly what it looks like. It's gross, but don't think about that, especially not at the end when this is done and you're drinking it. Don't think about poop in water. That's not, Stir it all up, okay? Just like homogeneity in your slurry and your yeast and stuff, we want homogeneity here. Mix it. If you don't know what that word means, it means uniform distribution. Then get your food scale. Wait, is that what I said? Oh, I wrote good scale in my notes. Oops. Get your food scale. And here is a different technique for measuring out the amount of maple syrup to use in a fermentation, or honey if you're making a mead. So turn your scale on and then put your container of maple syrup on it. In this case, it was 5 pounds, 15 ounces. Now, we're going to be adding a total of 2.5. I started with adding 2. So if I want to add 2 pounds into my bucket, I'm just going to pour out the maple syrup directly from the container into the bucket until my scale reads 3 pounds, 15 ounces. Does that make sense? This way we don't have to pour it into a bowl and then from the bowl into the bucket. It saves us a step. We don't have to clean the bowl afterwards. So that's what I did. So then I stirred that up because you gotta stir it. I took a gravity reading on it and it came out a little bit low. So I decided to add 8 more ounces, hence why it's a total of 2.5 pounds. To give us an initial gravity of 1.088. Now, when all this stuff was mixed together, I discovered it pretty much fills this bucket. There's like 1 inch before you're at the very top of the bucket. That's a little too full. That's just as a future reference. But now we know. Next time I'll use just 1 gallon. Maple syrup, it's got a lot of moisture in it. And I knew that. I should have applied that knowledge. Next, add half a teaspoon of pectic enzyme. There's nothing fancy to this. Just measure it out. Plop it in there. Then add 1/8 of a teaspoon of wine tannin. As I said, this is to round out the flavor profile of our wine. We'll probably need to add other things besides just the wine tannin, but I want to start with this here now. And then if we want to adjust the acid levels, I'll do that in secondary when I can taste it directly and know how it's going to impact the flavor. Sometimes you don't know what your wine is going to need until it's already made, unless you've made it before. We haven't made this before.
Then pour in the yeast and nutrient slurry. I forgot to narrate literally the most important part. You gotta put your yeast in there.
Then press the lid onto the bucket. It takes a lot of elbow grease to really get it on. It locks out all the air and seals it in, so it's a tough lid to get on, but you can do it. Just press hard. And then get an airlock and fill it halfway with sanitizer water and put it into the grommet, thus sealing everything off. The airlock is, of course, to let out that CO2 that is produced over the fermentation without allowing anything to get in. A lot of times, at least right now with the weather and the time of year, there are a lot of fruit flies and they get stuck in the airlock, but it's a good thing. That means the airlock worked. It kept the fruit flies out of your wine and in the airlock. So that's a good thing. Just clean it out though. It gets gross. If you get like 30 fruit flies in there, people are going to ask questions. Some tips. Number 1, take notes. Notes are important because you might want to recreate this one day if it turns out really good. And if it turns out really bad, you might want to know why. Label your fermenter, because you'll notice I have 3 buckets here. Only one of them's labeled, so do as I say, not as I do. But the more fermentations you have, you're going to misplace one of them eventually. So just label it. Now, what can you expect from this fermentation? Number 1, expect fermentation. Expect to see activity in the airlock. Within anywhere from 2 to 48 hours, you should see fermentation begin to happen, and you'll see bubbles just go through slowly in the airlock, and they'll increase over time and then slow down near the end. But if you don't see any airlock activity, that means either your bucket is not fully closed, there's a crack, or the yeast are dead, and you gotta put more yeast in. This might be messy. Like I said, I filled it really high. There's jelly and jam in there. It's going to create a lot of foam with the fermentation. It may get up into the airlock, in which case just pop it out, clean it out, put more sanitizer in, and then pop it right back into place. No big deal. No big deal. You don't need to stress. You don't need to worry about it. Finally, add your FERMAID-O 3 times over the fermentation. You're going to add it after 24 hours of pitching the yeast, and then at 48 hours, and then at 72 hours. So depending on how you look at it, that's day 2, 3, and 4. So to add this in, I like to get a little jar with some water in it and weigh out 1.5 grams of FERMAID-O, shake it up to make it a liquid, and then open the lid, pour it in, and then close the lid. That's it. I just do that 3 times, and that will ensure a healthy, happy fermentation. So that's it, kids. That's it. We did it. I think this is going to turn out awesome. It might not, but if it doesn't, we'll have plenty of laughs and knowledge along the way. So thank you for watching. Watch more videos, and as always, have a wonderful day.